of intention. It's about the whole idea of when we have an unbending kind of intent in our hearts about something that we want to create and attract into our lives, that it absolutely is impossible for it not to work when we identify ourselves with the whole field of intention from which all of us originated. And it is essentially a very spiritual message. And I will be sharing more about that tomorrow afternoon, exactly what intention is and how we can attract virtually anything we want into our lives. I learned something when I was very, very young. I was the richest kid in the orphanage. I was the only kid that ever had money all the time. And today I'm 62 years old and I still have never made a house payment, nor have I ever made a car payment. And I have purchased 19 homes for various people in my family, including everyone in my family and my wife's family and people who work for me, and my children and my wife's children from her previous marriage, and so on. It has been, and it isn't because I'm special, it isn't because I'm more talented, more educated, more brilliant than anybody else. It's because of something that I have always known in my heart, and that is that something that Earl Nightingale, a man who was a great friend of mine and a dear friend, passed away a few years back, put out a tape back in the 40s called The Strangest Secret. And the strangest secret is nothing more than these words: we become what we think about all day long. And it sounds almost too simple to be such a great and powerful secret. But the fact is that our thoughts are the things that we use to create our reality. Tomorrow afternoon, I will be speaking about the energy field from which all of us emanate. None of us came here because of our parents' blissful activity in the moment of our conception. We think that that's where we came from. But it's just an illusion, it's just a myth. We come from that place. My teacher in India a few years back was asked a question by one of his devotees: where does everything come from? And his response was, where does your question come from? It is from the same no place, the same place that has no boundaries and no form. And it is that spiritual element that all things emanate from. We become what we think about all day long. I've just published a book not very long ago called There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem. And the essence of that book is that when you bring higher and faster energy, which is how energy shows up in the universe, it's either high or low, or fast or slow. And higher and faster energy is the energy that nullifies and dissolves lower and slower energy. And even more than nullifying and dissolving it, it converts it into something called love and peace and kindness and receptivity and creativity. So that if you are living in a place in your life in which you have shortages, or which you have disease, or which you have disharmony, or struggles at all, and anything that you label a problem, if you can somehow learn how to do a somersault into the inconceivable and land in a place where you're looking at a new level of consciousness in which problems are not a possibility for you, and that you can attract anything that you want into your life, that there is a source in the universe. Or you can have a different vision. And the vision you can have is of you to be able to attract and create anything that you want, the power of the mind. One of the great lessons to learn from these kinds of experiences that you'll be having here. So What I'm suggesting is that there is a place within each and every one of us from which all of us can go, to where all of us can go. There was a man that I admired very much. His name was Herman Melville. Melville was a great American writer back in the 19th century. He wrote Moby Dick and many other great pieces of literature and much poetry. And he would leave his writing space in western Massachusetts, and he would go out into the cornfields, and he would lie down on his back, and he would see in August, he would see the corn, as they say in South Pacific, as high as an elephant's eye. I think, not South Pacific, whatever that is, Oklahoma, I guess it is. And he would imagine that this sea of corn, silk, that's all that he could see lying on his back, was the ocean. And, you know, I used to teach Moby Dick when I taught English literature. And a lot of people think that he was just an obsessive old man looking for a whale. But what Moby Dick was really about was the pursuit of that which everyone else considers to be impossible, and the obsessive determination to not allow oneself to be defeated by any forces in the universe. It's a very powerful theme in Melville's life. And as he would lie there on his back, he would look up, and this is what he wrote in Moby Dick. For as this appalling ocean surrounds the verdant land, so in the soul of man there lies one insular Tahiti, full of peace and joy, but encompassed by all of the horrors of the half-lived life. You got to go to Tahiti. You got to go to that inner Tahiti, that place of peace and joy. And as I'll be talking about tomorrow, make conscious contact with that source from which you emanated. Because most of us, when we come from that source, most of us, we show up into this world, and in this world, we take on something called an ego. And when we take on this ego, it's really nothing more than just an idea that we carry around about who we are. And we begin to believe in this idea about who we are. And this idea about who we are is something that we run our lives on. And it's really based upon the notion that who I am is what I have, and who I am is what I do, and who I am is what others think of me, my reputation, and who I am is separate from everyone else, and who I am is separate from what I would like to attract into my life, that is, from what's missing in my life. Somehow I'm separate from that. That's 5. And 6, who I am is separate from God, from my source. And those 6 ideas that we carry around inside of us are the things that destroy our abilities to become manifestors, attractors of anything that we want to place our attention on. One of my heroes back in the 1840s was a man named Henry David Thoreau. He had a wonderful definition of success. He went to prison, this man, because he refused to pay his taxes to a government that was doing to the people who had been living on this land for 10,000 years and just removing them in the name of our right to do so because of a piece of legislation signed by President Andrew Jackson in 1830 called the Indian Removal Act. It gave anybody the legal right to just remove people who had a language and an educational system and a history of living there. They were just removed. And Thoreau was so anguished by this in Concord, Massachusetts, that he went to prison, refusing to pay his taxes. And his neighbor's name was Ralph Waldo Emerson. He lived 2 streets over and 7 houses down. Those of you who saw my last PBS special know that I recorded it right there in Concord. And Emerson came to the jail at Concord, and he said to Thoreau, he said, "What are you doing in there? We need you out here." He was beginning the Transcendentalist movement, some of the ideas of which I'll be speaking about here today and tomorrow. And Thoreau reportedly said to him, "Ralph, what are you doing out there?" And Emerson paid his bail, and rather than return to his home, he went to live deliberately in the land in a place called Walden Pond out in western Massachusetts. And he wrote an essay on the necessity of civil disobedience. And this is what his definition of success sounded like in that essay. He said, "If you advance confidently in the direction of your own dreams and endeavors, and endeavor to live the life which you have imagined, you will meet with a success unexpected in common hours." That's a really powerful definition of success. That you have things inside of you called dreams and endeavors, and if you live by them, rather than chasing after what it is that you think you would like to have, if you live by that connection to your source, because our thoughts is the way that God thinks through us. Our thoughts is how God thinks through us. And when our thoughts are in rapport with what it is that Spirit is like, which I'll speak about tomorrow, when our thoughts are in harmony with that, everything that the source is capable of doing, you are capable of doing. The greatest teacher who ever came to this planet, who ever walked among us 2,000 years ago, reminded us, after performing miracles and converting water into wine and raising the dead and manifesting the gift of fish and loaves by just his thoughts, the power of his thoughts to attract into our lives whatever it is that he would think about. Such was the energy level at which this man lived, this being lived. He said, "Even the least among you can do all that I have done, and even greater things." It's in every one of us. Every one of us has this capacity to do it. The only way you can get past the fact that you're not doing it, that it's not working, that you do have illnesses, that you do have struggles, that you do have addictions, that you do have scarcity in your life in any way, is because you have identified with those 6 components of the ego. When you let go of that and return to your source and become inspirado, in spirit, when you do that, it starts to chase after you. And it's just something that all I can say is that it does. And I stand up here knowing that this is true. See, I know because before I ever showed up here on this planet, I had a conversation with my source, with God. And God said, "What do you want to do this time around?" Because in an infinite world, you get an infinite number of chances at this. And I said, "I'd like to teach self-reliance." And God said, "You really want to teach self-reliance for a whole lifetime? It's all I've ever done, 62 years later. You sure you want to teach self-reliance?" I said, "Yes, that's exactly what I'd like to do." He said, "Well, then we better get your little ass into an orphanage." And you better spend a good 10 years there, and you better learn how to rely upon yourself. And once you know how to rely upon yourself, you'll be able to teach it. But if you're waiting for somebody else to teach it, or you're waiting for the right things to show up, and learning self-reliance was what's the great benefit. When people say it must have been a hard time for you as a child, I said, look, when you're 6 years old, you don't wake up every morning and say, oh my God, I'm an orphan again today. Why does this happen to me, not everybody else? You don't do that. You get up and you do whatever you do when you're 6. And then you turn 40 a week or two later. Seems like it, doesn't it? And then you look at your life and you say, oh my God, I got all of these problems, and my wife doesn't understand me, and my kids just think I'm a jerk, and I'm addicted to this, and I'm poor, and I don't have all these bills. Why is that? Someone said, why is your life so messed up? Well, what do you expect from me? You know, I was an orphan, you know. Or my mother liked my sister better. Or Sarah Lee made me fat, or something that is back there in our past we rely upon, when in fact we are nothing more than the product of the choices that we make. When you move into this place of inspiration, in 10 Secrets for Success and Inner Peace, the second secret in here, what I've done is I put together, to me, the 10 most important ideas that anyone can master in their lives. And I've tried to raise my children on these ideas and live my life on them. And I've been keeping notes on them for years and years. When I was 19 years old, I was handed a book. And the book was a series of short stories. And one of the short stories in there was written by Leo Tolstoy, who in his lifetime was considered to be the most famous person on the planet. 1904, 1905, before radio, before television, before all of the communication, mass communication we have, this man was distributing novels all over the planet. Anna Karenina and so on. And Tolstoy wrote a short story, and I joined the Navy right after I graduated from high school, went out to California, got on board a refrigerator ship called the USS Vega, and I was going to go across the Pacific Ocean to join my ship, which was the USS Ranger, an aircraft carrier, the largest ship in the world at that time. And it was based in Yokosuka, Japan, and we took a ship that took 29 days to get to a place called Sasebo in southern part of Japan, Kyushu. And as I was getting on board this ship to go to my big ship, my uncle, Bill, who was a school teacher in Hayward, California, handed me a copy of this. He said, read this story. It's really important. And I was at 19 years old. And about 10 or 11 days out, I was in my bunk, and it was a little rough. And I picked up this story, and I started reading it. It was about 120, 130 pages. His name was Ivan Illich. And Ivan was a judge who hated his life, but he was committed to doing things that he had been programmed to do. He was a dancer instead of a choreographer. When I say a dancer, I use the metaphor from a song written by Jackson Browne called For a Dancer. He said, just do the steps that you've been shown by everyone you've ever known, until the dance becomes your very own. Into a dancer you have grown from a seed someone else has thrown. Go on ahead and throw some seeds of your own somewhere between the time you arrive and the time. And then the kicker, he said, because in the end, there is one dance you'll do alone. We'll all do it alone. And this was Ivan Illich. He hated his wife, despised her. He despised his life, and yet he continued doing what he had been programmed to do. He was a dancer, doing the steps that he'd been shown by everyone he'd ever known, and it had become his own dance, and he was even teaching his own children the same dance, and he despised that about himself. And he got to the end of his life, and he was lying on his deathbed. It's a great metaphor. It's a great picture to have in your own mind. And he was looking up at his wife, and he was holding her hand, and as he was and he knew that he was dying. The story is called The Death of Ivan Illich. And he looked up at his wife, and the last words that he said before he died were, "What if my whole life has been wrong?" And he died. Can you imagine anything more horrible to think? And I always think of that picture when I think of my children saying, "Do you think I should do this, or do you think I should do that, or should I stay in college because, you got a doctorate, you went to college, and will I be disappointing you?" One of the things Sky wanted to know, would I be disappointing her if she left school? Well, when I was 19 years old, I took out a little notebook, and it was one of the first things I wrote down for this book that I was to write 40 years later. And I wrote a note to myself. It said, "Dear Wayne," and I still have it, "don't die with your music still in you."